Good morning. My name is Lee McElwennan with SCRA, an investment manager, and it's a pleasure to welcome you to this morning's webinar. And this webinar is Building Software-Oriented Minimum Viable Products, or MVPs, as those of us in the practice know them as. And we're fortunate to have Keith Shields with us as our speaker. Before we get started, just a couple of things I want to be able to mention to you, that the presentation is being recorded and will be sent to all the registrants at the end of today. Also ask the audience to feel free to type in any questions that you have into the chat box. So hopefully you'll be able to know that. We'll take those as they come. So instead of waiting until the very end, Keith has agreed graciously to actually take all the questions as we go to, and I'll interject those. And then last but not least, let me just introduce Keith and tell you, those of you that weren't able to log in earlier, see a little bit about his bio. He has a really interesting bio. I've dealt with a lot of founders, but I don't know that I've ever dealt with one who knew exactly what he wanted to do at the age of 10. So Keith is certainly unique, and that when he was asked kind of for what did he want for his 10th birthday, most of us might be a bike, or others, Keith wanted a domain name. And then you fast forward to kind of what he was doing in his years in high school, and then you look at his mom tells him to go ahead and get a summer job, and he decides, well, he's just going to sell a website instead. He's a graduate with a BS in mechanical engineering from a great university, and with Ohio State. Those of you are Clemson fans, so you have to be a little careful with that one come the end of the football year. But he's just is a great example of how he knew exactly what he wanted to do. Partnered with Josh Tucker, his current business partner, to build a college startup called Applets, that Inc. Actually called one of the coolest, if not the coolest, college startup of 2014, which is quite an achievement. And he's been leading app and those web app projects for clients with Designli, based in Greenville, South Carolina, ever since. So please join me in welcoming Keith, and we really appreciate your time and attention. Keith, over to you.
Thanks, Lee. Appreciate the intro.
Absolutely.
Excellent. Awesome. Let me go ahead and share my screen here, and we'll dive into a presentation on MVPs, if that sounds good.
Okay.
All righty. Share screen. We good to go?
We are good to go.
All right. All right, excellent. And like Lee mentioned, everybody, if anyone has questions that crop up, feel free to shoot them in the chat or in the questions module, and we'll take those as we go. So as Lee touched on, I'm with Designli here in Greenville, South Carolina. We are a custom software consulting company. And what we do is lead non-technical folks, meaning non-developers, through the process of building software and past potholes. There are numerous potholes when it comes to this process, and we're going to get into those in a little bit today. And our whole kind of spiel, our slogan, if you will, is helping startups and entrepreneurs go from vision to version 1. So taking something out of your head and transforming that into a marketable, first launchable version of a software project. And that doesn't mean we don't stay around after the fact. We love to stay involved and help iterate on that over time based on market feedback. But I think this vision to version 1 thing is a compelling statement, because there's a lot of software firms that are bad at this for the reasons we're going to do. And we do this particularly around iPhone apps, Android apps, and web apps, which is a fancy way of saying a website that requires custom programming. So we don't do marketing sites and some things that are just content based. It's, if you need a senior developer to go and architect something on the web, then we would do that. So today's topic, of course, that you all joined up to discuss is all about MVPs, which stands for minimum viable products. And the way I like to start this topic is, if you ask, we're a services business, so we talk with clients all the time. And when you ask a client what their version 1 is, what is their minimum viable product, their answer is always the rocket ship. And this is very common in the world of software, because it is easy to dream. The problem with software is that anything's possible. We can pretty much build whatever is in your mind as a non-technical founder. And that means it's easy to kind of, make that a big, huge vision. And that's great. We need to have a vision for the future, but that doesn't necessarily mean that's the skinniest thing that we could possibly launch with. And this has real repercussions when it comes to shopping around, trying to find a vendor to build your app or your web startup, because you as a client are frustrated with the vendor selection process too, because you'll go and explain your software concept to a dozen different firms. And inevitably what happens is you get quotes back anywhere from $30,000 to $300,000. And it's kind of shocking. Like, what the heck just happened? I just explained my same app idea to these different people, and this is a 10x price swing. And we hear this all the time. This is a very common complaint, if you will, when people are coming kind of into the Designli sales process, explaining their concepts to us. They say, yeah, well, I'm getting quotes all across the board. How do I know who to trust? How do I know that the software vendor that I'm choosing really understands my vision? And okay, so why is that happening? It's because if you explain your rocket ship, every developer, every rocket builder, if you will, has a different set of assumptions on how it should be built and what type of rocket the client will, kind of expect to see in order to be completely satisfied with the process. And so this speaks to the need for a minimum viable product. And the nice thing about starting with something lean is that we can have the opportunity to spec it out, define it in exhaustive detail, in as much detail as possible, taking away the need for stacking these assumptions on top of one another. So keeping things small reduces budget and timeline risk. And the interesting thing about this is convincing a non-technical client to adopt this mentality is actually our major challenge here at Designli as a services company, again, building these software systems for clients. And I think there's a handful of reasons for that. A, it's easy to dream, like I mentioned, and people don't want to sacrifice the dream that's in your mind. And also there's been talk around MVPs are dead and users expect feature-packed and flawlessly functioning products the first time. And it's interesting because it is true that the bar has been raised, particularly because for consumer-facing software like apps on the App Store, consumers are used to interacting with really polished products, right? They're using Instagram and Facebook, and these things have been perfected by a team of thousands of developers over a decade in some cases. And so obviously there's a nice level of polish for a lot of the consumer-facing software that people are used to using. So what does that mean then for this concept of MVPs? That's the question. And before we set about answering that, a little bit about me. Lee obviously gave a great intro, but being a partner with Designli, I take the lead on something that we call the SolutionLab. And you don't have to care about what exactly this means, except for the fact that the SolutionLab is our kind of MVP scoping engagement that we do as a service for customers. And lots of people can take your money to code your software. There's probably 100,000 firms that do this as a service that Designli competes with, but the SolutionLab makes us different in that this is a kind of unique approach that we take when bringing in a new customer to our process. And what the SolutionLab does is spend time on the front end before we start building anything, figuring out the business case behind the app. How can we solve the problem that's been identified and with as little code as possible, keeping things as skinny as possible, and add value to achieve a return on investment. Only then, after it's launched and building revenue, should we go and add features and add some additional sophistication. So boiling that down, this means our full-time jobs are essentially to identify opportunities for and then to go and implement a software MVP for a newly identified problem. This is what we do for our customers. So when we think about an MVP, we acknowledge that it does not mean copping out on usability or having to build a valuable product. Certainly we have to do that. Nor does it mean building something so limited in scope that it feels half-assed. That used to be the understanding of MVP is you're just doing a bunch of stuff, you're doing it, it's okay. And then we'll make it better later on once we get users. That doesn't really fly anymore. We just need to think about a new and appropriate way to think through MVPs. And this is a graphic that I love to use to illustrate the point. So if we were to try to solve the problem of transportation for a customer, what we don't want to do is the top row there, where we're starting with the wheel and we're connecting wheels together, and then we build this body of the car. And only once we get to the finish line of the manufacturing process do we have something that's actually usable. We finally get to the luxury custom car that we have in our brand. This is our rocket ship. Rather, if we want to solve the problem of transportation, we can think of a lot of different products that are great products, and they all solve the problem of transportation, but they're very different in terms of how complex, how hard they'll be to launch and get built. We can start with a skateboard. Maybe we add a little bit of ability to turn, and it's a scooter. Maybe we have some ability to go faster. Now it's a bicycle. Maybe we introduce a combustion engine. Now it's a motorcycle. So the point is, these are all products that consumers love, and they're all, I would say, quite perfected. The skateboard is a fun product. A lot of people love skateboards, and they're really fine-tuned, so that you can lean and across skateboard to skateboard, you can lean and know how to turn. But these are all clearly much simpler to build than a car. The concept of an MVP is also helpful because pivots are real and should be embraced. And if you overbuild on jumping right to the luxury car, you're going to be very reluctant, even if you say you aren't, to field feedback from users and make tweaks to the product based on what you're actually hearing from the market. That market feedback is inevitable, and it should be encouraged. If you're too invested in that version 1, you're going to drag your feet a little bit. And so this is a fun little aside. Lee, I'm not sure the best way to approach this. I was going to kind of let people holler out, but everyone's muted, so maybe I just do a pause. But essentially, the slide here is all about, can you name these companies? So a company started with one thing and then pivoted, and after I hit the next button, you'll see what the company is today.
Yeah, so maybe if whoever wants to put in the chat, so it goes to everybody, just suggest you can answer it that way. That might be the easier way.
Sure. Yep. So type in the chat if you know what this company is. It began as an online role-playing game where users would travel around a digital map, interact with other users to buy, sell, and build items with an added photo sharing tool. I don't think I can see the chat, but we won't waste too much time on this.
Yeah. All right. Let's see what
Flickr.
Flickr. Okay.
Yep. And if you're a tech nerd, some of the people participating here, these are kind of old and classic examples. So don't bear with me. I just think they're good and illustrative of the problem here. Next one, originally began as an online platform which allowed people to browse and shop their favorite retailers and send them updates when their favorite items were available and on sale.
Let's see if anybody has. All right, Bruce, you going to come back on this one? We have one from
eBay. Okay.
Yeah.
2 eBay guesses. This is Pinterest.
Okay.
Last one. Originally began as a website where people would find and subscribe to podcasts, but the founders feared iTunes would be taking over the podcast niche, which is a good thing to fear. That kind of happened. Spotify or Pandora? All right, this one is Twitter. So just a silly little aside on, we have identified a problem. We think we're going to build some software to solve that problem, but we need to keep ourselves receptive to what the market says, because we don't really know until we get this thing launched. It's more reason to start small. If we want to solve for transportation, maybe we should try to do a skateboard first. So getting back to the whole MVP idea, I think the best way to think through this is looking at real examples of how to identify what a good MVP would be in order to solve a problem. And this is, I think, interesting, slightly biased, obviously, because we'll do this based on Designli client projects, real projects that we were assigned to work on.
Okay.
So let's start with this gasoline ordering system. This is a real customer again. This company sells gasoline to gas stations. They receive orders and they deliver gasoline on a weekly basis to gas stations. The problems that they verbalized when they came to our team in an effort to build software to solve this, the problems are gas prices change regularly. It's hard for customers to predict those changes. Hard for customers to know when to order. You know, maybe the gas price will go down over the next week and they should really delay their order a little bit to save some money. And it's manual. Customers actually call the company's receptionist to say, hey, I want X gallons. So it's a very old school business. And the receptionist from there manually processes the orders, sends off the invoice to accounting, all that good stuff, coordinates trucks to deliver. So what is a fully featured software solution to this problem? The rocketship as requested by the client. Again, all clients describe rocketships to Keith. That's what we do. So the rocketship, the thing, this is what we need in order to solve the problem, is what they verbalized. We need to allow customers to log into their accounts, see gas prices in real time, place an order from an iPhone app, an Android app, and or a web app, all three. It needs to tie into the company's ERP, which is your enterprise resource planning tool, the whole business automation software system, to automatically process orders, give truck drivers the go-ahead on making the delivery. Customers can view truck drivers en route via the iPhone or Android app, like if you're looking at your Uber driver coming to you, basically. It needs to tie into the company's accounting software to track bills and invoices. It needs to tie into Bloomberg market data for customers to see gas price trends to help in knowing when to buy. We could certainly build that. $250,000 to $350,000 likely, and this is just a broad strokes guesstimate. 12-month build time. It's a rocket ship. You know, it's a large system. What is a good MVP here? How would the SolutionLab guide the software effort? Well, we could allow customers to log into their accounts, see their gas prices in real time, place an order from the app, all that stuff they think they need. We could do all that. We could use a single code base, a cross-platform coding language called Flutter, which is from Google. No web, and so this allows us to get an iPhone and Android app out with a single code base. That's good. The order can be sent to the receptionist via email for manual processing. From there on, the manual process will take over from the point of order onwards. The receptionist can continue coordinating trucks and shooting everything to the accounting system, etc., just like they do today. The gas station customer, the app user, can see Bloomberg market data within the app via a web view, which means bringing up Bloomberg's gas page in kind of a web view within the app, which means we don't need to learn Bloomberg's API in order to pull that data automatically. We just defer it all to Bloomberg. And it's still held within our app experience. What the customer sees in this case, we believe, is what's most important for MVPs. For MVPs, this is what matters. The customer experience is still great. They can have an app. The app is branded like their gas vendor. They can see the price in real time. They can hit boom, order, and it feels automated. But really, the back-end plumbing is all quite manual. Once, and that's if, customers adopt this starting point of the solution, then yeah, totally, we can go ahead and replace the back-end manual systems with software automation. But before we prove out that first value, the first vital assumption, which is customers are willing to have this app on their phone and use that instead of calling the receptionist for today's price, then there's no need to automate the back-end stuff. Now we're talking $30,000 solution, 2-month build time. So it's kind of counterintuitive to have a services company that talks you through how to spend less money, but that's exactly what we do.
That's true. That is unique. Yeah.
That's the best way to have happy customers, and that's what we're all about. And also build a relationship where, you know, the best software project is one that we can continue to iterate on and evolve over a period of years, and that's what we're trying to do. Okay, jump to a second example. Second example is a project reporting tool. This company provides construction services to businesses. Quite straightforward. They have a handful of problems that are very common among construction businesses. They have expensive project managers that fly around to various construction sites across the US, and they do these eyeball inspection tests, and they report that progress back to clients. So that requires flights and hotel stays and etc. The there's a manual progress report creation process for the end client on a weekly basis. So that project manager manually maintains a punch list of pending tasks, as well as the eyeball inspection test result, and they report that back to the customer. So what did they describe as being the thing we have to build in terms of software to solve the problem? What is the rocket ship? Well, all of our construction workers need to install a worker app on iPhone and Android and manually check into the job site each day. The workers would then take pictures of progress on a regular basis as prompted by the app, and that would remove the need for the PM to be there to do an eyeball inspection in person, because they get those pictures. Allow the end client to log into a client web app to see all the check-ins and the progress pictures. They want the customer to be able to see those updates without waiting for that weekly report, basically. Allow the project manager to log into a PM web app to monitor progress and the punch list by assigning tasks to individual contractors that would then pop back up on that worker app, the iPhone Android app. So that's a PM web app, a client web app, then a construction worker iPhone Android app. That's 3 different software systems basically that we have to build. Not small, 200, 250K-ish, 10-month build time. That's a rocket ship. What is a good MVP here? How would the SolutionLab guide the software effort? Well, okay, the first, the SolutionLab is essentially a series of workshops. And in the first workshop, we uncovered the fact that the company already provides iPhones to all workers. So that speaks to the need for no Android app. That's not a big discovery, but very impactful in terms of what we have to build. The workers can install a native app explicitly for iPhone then. The app can automatically check in based on GPS location when they arrive and leave. There's something called a geofence, and when the worker steps within the fence, they're on the job site, and boop, we know Keith Shields just arrived on the site. That's a great use case for software. It's not that hard to do. The workers can still take pictures of progress at the end of each workday, and it can sync back to a database that we maintain. That's still a great idea. Removing the need for the PM to travel is certainly the biggest goal here for version 1. The project manager can access the PM web app, select which items they want to dump into a client-facing report, which can generate a PDF file, and the client-facing report can be exported from that web app, and be manually sent to the client each week. So what is the most important business pain point to solve for MVPs? That is what matters. In this case, this solution automates the report generation process and eliminates the need for the eyeball inspection test, saving the flights and the hotels. Now PMs can handle way more jobs because they don't have to be physically at each one, fewer flights around the country. And there's no need to automate client communication at this stage. And this is quite a good kind of thing to keep in mind for most MVPs is the client, in this case, the person who's paying for the construction, they oftentimes don't want to automate their labs with software. They like the white glove concierge feeling of this project manager reaching out every week saying, "Hey Lee, you stakeholder, this is how well we're doing. Do you have any questions?" And if you said, "Hey, you no longer get to talk to your PM, just log into this dashboard whenever you want," that's actually something that they might frown upon instead of thinking is a value. So why spend $100,000 on it? Now we're talking. This is $90,000 in a 4-month build time instead of, I think before it was 200 to 250, something like that. All right. Last example, and I'll stop boring you guys with this. Sales collaboration tool. This company brokers deals between buyers and suppliers. So basically this company is a middleman connecting these two parties. The problems within their business. The company's sales agents act independently. Essentially the workflow is there's 100 sales agents, they all find a supplier looking to offload some stuff, and they look through their own Rolodex to find someone that might be interested in buying said stuff, trying to keep it as basic as possible. Hundreds of sales agents not sharing information. And we were like, what? How's that possible?
Yeah. You're
looking at your own Rolodex only. It's kind of shocking. So approaching this concept a bit differently, a bad MVP, what would be a bad minimum viable product for this particular problem? All right, well, technically, we could simply connect sales agents via a group email chain, like a listserv. And sales agents could email the listserv when a new supplier is found, asking if anyone knows a buyer. At the very least, now they're sharing their Rolodex with each other. That's a step in the right direction. And the takeaway here is MVPs for solving particular problems don't always involve custom software. And so a lot of the times our solution lab the output of that will be suggesting a slew of off-the-shelf tools or just concepts like a listserv that maybe a traditional business hadn't thought of. And then they go and implement that themselves. That's perfectly fine. The main priority here is to solve the problem at hand. And that's why the Solution Lab is a paid for module in and of itself. It is really a standalone service for us too. This solution was attempted. So that's why I made it into the bad MVP slide here, because the outcome was not good. There's a couple problems with the listserv in this case. Again, a couple hundred sales agents, so even more customers and needs for matches. So there's no organization, there's no categorization of different types of suppliers and information around what type of buyer is needed. The buyer persona who we're seeking is quite specific most of the time. There's no searchability. There's no indication of time sensitivity, which oftentimes comes along with this particular business model. So usability is poor, adoption is low. The sales reps hate it, don't use it. Not a good MVP. What's a good MVP? And what is something like our Solution Lab would go and suggest in our series of workshops? Well, okay, let's try to build this web platform. Sales agents can post a new supplier that is found and what they're offering. They can tag with various tags that define criteria like we need a buyer in X days. This is the type so that we can do some searching and filtering. Sales agents who know buyers and are looking for deals to suggest to them, which is oftentimes how this works too, can follow certain categories and see kind of matching tags, matching posts, if you will, that might fit that bill. And this web platform can prove immediate ROI to the company by simply helping sales agents share knowledge and Rolodexes. That's the bar we're trying to get past here. We could design this most vital feature set extremely well so the usability among sales agents is high, and then add on new features later. That is always the approach. And maybe we start with this. This is an example of a Razor scooter instead of a luxury custom car, and we can evolve it into a motorcycle and then car later on. So what can we build to prove immediate ROI to the client? Or if building a B2C app to prove out a revenue generating concept as soon as possible. For MVPs, that is what matters. All this particular company really needs or needed is a simple intranet to share leads across salespeople for the greater good of the company. And a quick aside here is we found there's a lot of opportunity in old school business models like this one for software automation of paper and pencil processes. Kind of like that gasoline ordering example too, that everything is done. Customers are calling the receptionist asking for the current price of gas. She has to answer and then take the order by writing it down on a piece of paper. So there's a lot of ways we can make everyone's lives easier with software. So takeaways. MVPs aren't dead. Building an MVP just means tackling the issue at hand in the most elegant and simplest way possible to prove the need and to prove the market. You can still build MVPs that are a pleasure to use and that satisfy the high standards of end users. And a great way of doing that is making the user facing, the most important user, like our customer, that experience can be great and polished and beautiful and have animations and really nice design. But the back end plumbing, after you hit place order, the customer doesn't know that an email is being generated by the system, sent over to the receptionist. They don't care. The order is being placed and the timestamp is there so that the gas price is guaranteed. That's all that matters. So the manual backends are something that we do a lot of the time because that seems to be the best hack for keeping the backend plumbing component down. You don't need to tie into your ERP on day one. That would increase your costs like crazy. So polish your digital product so that it feels complete with its MVP feature set, even if the future roadmap is much larger. And that's why I like that skateboard, scooter, motorcycle, car analogy, because all those products feel complete even though the person who wants to build the car is thinking about the car and has a dream for the car in their minds. Users don't really know that. They bought a scooter and they love the scooter and they use it every day. They're getting from point A to point B. That's it. That is the conclusion of that presentation. So hopefully that makes sense to everybody. You enjoyed it.
I did. Thanks, Keith. I appreciate it. So if I have several questions I've already jotted down in the middle of our presentation, but I'll defer to the audience, those of you that are still with us. If you do have questions for Keith, since you are somewhat bashful to jump right in the middle, go ahead and send them now. And while they're doing that, I've got a couple, Keith, and after spending 20, 25 years in software companies, one thing that we struggle with is, where is good enough? Where do you do a code freeze on an MVP to get it to market? I'd love to know your thoughts about how do you make that determination to get where it really is a viable product and you test it in the market?
Right. So, the whole concept of scope creep is the realest problem of problems when it comes to building software. And so the way we deal with that is in this solution lab, we're discussing these things and figuring out, here's this type of box we can put around the MVP, and we define it really well. So we have a series of outputs that kind of slice and dice that in as much documentation as possible. And at the conclusion of that, clients give us the stamp of, yeah, that's good enough in terms of feature set. Then we go through the second step of the process, which is graphic design and prototyping. And that's more typical of what you see in services companies, where we design the interface of the app, right? And it's basically a series of Photoshop files simulating each feature. And we put it into a clickable demo where you can actually bring it up on your phone and you can tap around and the buttons are linked together, but there's no code yet. And when we go through that design stage, to your point, people tend to dream and they're like, oh man, like I really wish we could add that feature back because look how cool it's looking now. And so the specs after the solution lab tend to bloat a little bit. So after the solution lab, we do have a plus or minus 15% variance in like what we expect the cost to be. And we say, please pick features based on the plus, just so that we're totally safe in that design process. But after the clickable design, that's where we try to get to that frozen, this is good enough. Because now you can share it to people, you can really get some good validation to make sure you're barking up the right tree because you're sharing it with folks and feeling good about it. And then only then do we start writing code and getting it built. But we try to freeze the scope of if we can execute exactly what's in this clickable design here, we have a successful version 1 to launch.
Okay, I've made a great explanation, because that's one of the hardest things to do is to prevent scope creep, because you can always add new features.
Indeed.
We do have a couple of good questions coming in. I'll take them in the order that they were presented. Seth asked, what's the best way to introduce paywall to the app user?
Nice question, Seth. Yeah, so the applets days, Lee, in your introduction, you mentioned our applet startup that we started when we were sophomores at Ohio State, my business partner and I. He dropped out of school. It's a classic startup story. But that company, we basically were building apps at scale. It was this monthly app idea competition. We don't have to get much into that, but basically we built one app a month based on this public voting contest of people submitting their own app ideas. And so we have a lot of experience building consumer-facing apps for that reason. We operated that for 3 years. And so we tried all the ways to introduce paywalls to users, right? Some of the apps were free. We were just banking on the Instagram approach where you are worth $1 billion with zero revenue just because of user base size. We tried, 99 cents to download. We tried, in-app purchases, all that good stuff. And so to answer the question in a very roundabout way, after a heck of a lot of trial and error, we're convinced that the best way to introduce a paywall to the app user is the freemium model, where they download the app, they see the value of the product, they're feeling good about it. Maybe it's 30 days of full feature access, and then we introduce a small monthly subscription thereafter. Or better yet, it's this initial set of features is always going to be free, and it is the MVP set of features, meaning it's very, it's solving the problem and I'm feeling great about it. I'm going to use this forever. And slowly but surely, we start teasing feature upgrades for small additional in-app purchase fees. That that freemium model, getting the user bought in and fully using your solution is very important before you ask for money. For whatever reason, 99 cents being asked for by an app is still a lot to people.
Yeah, so it definitely seems that way. Did you see, Seth, that a follow-on question to that regarding kind of the UX interface? I don't know if you saw that right below.
Oh, yeah. You know, from the UX standpoint, there's a lot of ways to do it. Especially when it comes, a good example of this, you know, and I'm not the UX expert on our team, but a good example of this is if you want to have a monthly subscription in your app, and let's say it's a 1 month free. We see a bad UX for that a lot of our clients try to implement is getting you to agree to the month. Right when you download the app, the first screen you see is agree to the monthly subscription, and you've agreed to pay for it after the 30-day trial. There's a lot of people that drop off at that point. If you again allow them into the feature set, and now they're building a routine into it, and it's becoming a habit in their day, and they're loving it, and then you ask them to initiate a trial or jump right to payment after they have experienced the features instead of before, the drop off is much less. The kind of flow through that paywall is a lot better. And so there's certainly some kind of UX best practices around doing things like that.
Okay. So a question came in from Doug, a little bit more information just about what the time and cost estimates are for your SolutionLab. How do you approach that?
Yeah. So our SolutionLab is essentially a fixed fee of $5,000. All of our new clients go through it, and it's a 3-week process, and it's a series of workshops. I can explain that more if you care for me to, but basically it's half up front, and the half upon completion once you're totally satisfied. And again, the outputs that come out of that series of workshops, we have what's called an application UX overview, which is kind of like a business plan when it focuses on the product. So everything that we need to know before we start laying code down. I like to explain it like bringing in an architect to blueprint your custom home before you bring a contractor to pour cement. You're not going to build your custom home without having an architect give you that blueprint first. And that's what we're doing in the lab. And then we slice and dice that business plan of sorts in a bunch of different ways. We write user stories, which is kind of foundational for how you build software these days. We build user persona cards, which is a kind of mock face, name, personality traits, tech savviness, what device types you're going to be on, kind of a persona of who we think our users are going to be, including the client. Our client is the platform owner, and they're going to have a platform owner admin panel a lot of the times where they can manage their business without emailing Keith. So we'll define that and what they're trying to accomplish on that. So we build those. We build a user flow diagram, which is essentially a sitemap or a screen flow that shows how each of those user types can flow through the features available to them. And then the final thing we have out of the SolutionLab is a work breakdown structure, which is kind of what I was hinting at before, where we have a list of all of our features that we're going to build into the product. If there is a feature that has multiple paths, which a lot of the times there are, and so another silly example is I, as your home builder, if you're trying to build a custom home, I can help you figure out, all right, you want a kitchen, there's going to have to be a countertop in this kitchen, but if you think about the countertop, I could build you a laminate wood countertop that's very cost effective and it gets the job done, but it's nothing beautiful. Maybe we upgrade a little bit to the granite, which is probably what you have in mind when you describe a kitchen to me. Or maybe we splurge on the quartz, and that's marble, that's fancy. But that right there is a good example of one decision when it comes to building your house that leads to a $10,000 price swing in the cost of the house. And that's just one thing. We have to do that for the countertop, but also the crown molding and also the bathroom fixtures and yada, yada, yada. And so that's what this work breakdown structure is, where we're going to just define each feature and the options available, and then the exact development hours and thus cost per option. And now you can basically go through this list of features and cost per feature, and it's like an a la carte menu. And I want to build that, and it'll be X. And that feature there is not worth an extra $2,000. Let's shelve that for later. And that's the final output out of the SolutionLab, is a really tight way for a startup to say, all right, this is the cost of my dream, and then we can work it backwards based on making prioritizations around what's really important for that first version. So it was a very long-winded answer, but 3-week process, $5,000, we get that suite of deliverables at the end of that.
So really, it's a great answer. It sounds like you really help your end customer prioritize what's most important, because if they want to build a rocket ship, it's going to be a fairly significant cost, but there might be a way to satisfy the customer demand, have this be customer driven to get an MVP out on the market. Would that be a fair estimate?
Totally. Yep. In our first workshop in this lab thing that we're talking about, we actually approached the client's project with this exact, it's going to take me a while to tab back to it, but the exact picture, the skateboard analogy. So we say, okay, well, what you're bringing to the table here is a car. And then we have our team kind of blue skies approach in this agenda that we work through in this 5-hour workshop, kind of lay out what a sample, all right, here's what a motorcycle could be. You remove these pieces. Here's what a bike could be. Let's remove that. Well, here's what a scooter could be. And these are all fully functioning products, but the back end's getting more manual, and all the things we talked about, all the principles we talked about are starting to apply. And that's exactly how we begin. We say, hey, client, what you asked for is $200K. The motorcycle is $150. The bike is $100. This razor scooter is $50. Skateboard's $20. Kind of pick where in this spectrum you want to be, and then we'll define it as intensely as we can.
Well, I think that is remarkably refreshing, because there are a lot of people that do what you do that would go directly to the automobile, tell you it's going to be $500,000 to build exactly what you want, instead of doing what you're talking about, which is a discovery process to understand what their needs are and help them to prioritize it.
That's the idea.
So let me see, we've got a little bit more time. One following question that came in was, how often do you see recommending kind of off-the-shelf products that have some small customization versus doing a truly bespoke product?
Yeah, that's a great question. And frankly, it's happening more and more these days because apps, let's just talk about iPhone, Android apps, they haven't gone the way of the web, where when people approach me asking for a marketing site for their restaurant, I say, don't hire anyone that does what we do. Go to squarespace.com and hit go and pay $10 a month for it. And it's going to look fantastic. Apps haven't gone that way, but they have gone the way of rentable components that we can use as modules to speed up core feature development. So here's an example for you. A lot of the apps that people bring to the table, especially consumer-facing stuff, people always want messaging systems. I want to open up an instant messaging thread with another user to deliver my burrito, whatever the use case is. I don't know.
Right.
And messaging threads in and of themselves are not that complex. It takes us, maybe 100 development hours to build that. But when most people think about messaging threads, they think about pretty complex consumer-facing stuff that they use every day, like WhatsApp or Facebook's Messenger app. And when you think about that, now there's read receipts and now typing indicators, and you can tap to hold the previous message, do an emoji reaction, and confetti blows up from the top of the screen. Whatever the silly iOS stuff is now. And when you layer on all these nice to haves, now the messaging app is huge. It's a whole kind of product in and of itself. Right. So what we do a lot of the times is we say, hey, client, if you're not willing to go just the simple, write a message back and forth, like what a messaging app can start with, let's rent something called Sendbird, which is a startup that has a snippet of code that we as developers can drop into your app and speed up the process of messaging. And now it feels like this really compelling, sweet messaging app, but instead of taking hundreds of hours to build from scratch, it took us 10 hours to go and drop in their code. And that's just a small monthly fee that the client goes and pays Sendbird. It's a couple cents per month per user that uses the messaging feature, but we don't have to build any of that. And so these rentable components are something that will help us build more sophistication into your MVP, but keep that cost down. That's getting more common. So that's a common outcome of the fact that there's a lot of off-the-shelf things. Sometimes the combination of off-the-shelf things requires no custom code at all, but more often it's this example where it speeds up various features that we develop.
Well, it's a great example too, Seth, or Keith, of how you're doing best practices, where whether you're consulting GitLab or looking at routines that you can embed in the product that other people have written for experiences. It's a great way to approach it. We do have a couple more questions. Seth's back with a follow-up. So what's the best way to collect user feedback on features and bugs in-app versus getting slammed on the Google Play or Apple Store?
Yeah. This is why you've seen the pop-up in the app that used to say, do you want to rate us? Like, go to the App Store right now and hit the stars.
Right.
That's replaced with, how was your experience? Good, bad. If bad, open up a contact form. If good, go to the App Store, leave a review. This is UX. This is the kind of way to try to get the positive stuff only loop back to a review. So there's a lot of ways to do it. My personal favorite would be, you have to go through a beta testing period. We didn't really talk about that, but after core feature development is done, we always lead users through a 30-day beta test that we have additional budget for, that we ask for in the SolutionLab, because you don't want your services company to come back and ask for more money. So we kind of build that buffer in advance. But this is where we distribute it to friends, family, people that are friendly to us in our market, that are willing to offer feedback without blasting you on the App Store. And we have that additional budget to go and tweak the features a little bit based on what we hear, because inevitably clients want to do that. But the best way to tactically collect feedback is one of these, again, rentable tools. You could build a feedback module into the app, or you could rent something like Instabug is an example of people doing it really well, where there's a little feedback, or maybe the user shakes the app in order to bring up a feedback screen, and they can circle on the screen what is wrong, and then it'll shoot to a bug tracking tool instead of via email, so that you can actually organize your lives and prioritize what you want to change. That type of rentable system would be what I would suggest to folks that own apps or web systems. Snap Engage is another one. Hotjar is another one. There's a lot of kind of feedback widgets that you can drop into your product and collect feedback in an organized way with actual screenshots and actual reproduction steps when it comes to like what the user had done. That's very important for your developer to be able to track down and solve the problem. They need those reproduction steps, and people are never going to submit those themselves. And screen recordings. Seth is writing again. Screen recordings based on issues they're seeing that there's a, I believe, Instabug. If you're talking about an iPhone or Android app, I believe Instabug will shoot off videos to you as well.
Okay. There's also another question for Bruce. And thanks again for everybody. These are starting to roll in. Can you provide examples and methods you use to get user feedback during the various phases?
So methods in the various phases. So the SolutionLab, I think the tree that Bruce might be barking up here is a good one. The SolutionLab, unfortunately, is kind of conducted in a bubble, because it's my team thinking about the tech stuff, and it's the client, probably biased, thinking about why their solution is amazing, and why it needs to exist. So we're speccing out the best skateboard to solve the problem in that bubble. So we go through, now we have a really tight line item quote based on what we can build and how it could be maybe either more feature rich or less based on that a la carte features list. Only once we get through step 2, which is this graphic design and prototyping process, can we really start into the process of getting feedback. People don't want to read your 20-page Designli SolutionLab output, plus your user stories, plus your flow diagram that looks cool, but takes some brain power to digest. But they totally want to review your clickable demo that you can send them via email or bring up on your phone and drop in front of them around a beer, and once it's kind of made tangible like that, that's where we encourage clients, please don't jump right into development. Let's noodle on this for a while. Your clickable prototype, show it to people. Let's get it out in the world. You're the gas ordering company. Let's show the app mock-up to your gas ordering customers, the gas stations, and say, hey, would you use this thing if it existed? This is how it would work. This is exactly what it's going to look like once it's built. And let them kind of, that's also beneficial, because now that customer feels like part of the process, and they're really going to be invested in it once it's built. They're going to be diehard users of it. So that's where we begin the process of gaining feedback. And then through development, it's kind of like this beta idea, but we do it on a rolling basis too, where core feature development is broken down into sprints, where we have a set of features that is built and working at the end of each sprint, and we can pilot those features as we go instead of letting it compound all to the end. So that's a pretty broad answer.
Well, it sounds like too that to establish that product market fit, what you're talking about is so critical, that you get in front of prospective customers for a determined period of time to gather their requirements, and then sounds like you pull that back into your feedback loop before
Exactly.
the MVP is done. Okay.
Yep.
There is, I want to make sure that we get to everybody's questions. I think we've gotten Bruce's, Seth. We've got about another 5 to 10 minutes left. So if anybody has any other questions, go ahead and put those in the chat. Make sure, Keith, are there any ones that you see in there that we've missed?
Let me see here, scrolling through. Appreciate the questions, guys.
Yep.
No, I think that's it. Talk about the paywall, talk about SolutionLab cost, just out of curiosity from someone.
Yep, and Seth is with I think Seth is with Validity. I see you've got your look up there on LinkedIn. Well, right now, if there are no other questions, Keith, if you would be okay, in case anybody wants to be able to actually inquire a little bit further, would you be willing to share your email just as a contact?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
Yep. So my email is keith@designli.co, KEITH@Designli, my shirt here, .co. And you can certainly feel free to reach out and we can chat more about how this process can be applied to your concept.
Great, thank you very much, Keith. And before we close, I'm just going to remind everybody that the presentation is being recorded, and the recording will be sent to all registrations by tomorrow. If I could ask everybody to complete the survey after the webinar finishes, so just stay on and complete that survey. That really is helpful for us to make sure we're delivering not only the topics that you are looking for going forward. And these are continuing on an ongoing basis. Our next one, I believe, is Thursday, September the 30th, with the title of Going Virtual, which is certainly apropos to what all of us who went back to the office for a short period of time are in many cases going back to virtual, if not partially, maybe entirely. So that's going to be a good topic of interest. And Kelsey, if there's anything more that you would like me to put in, let me know at this point. But I want to go ahead and thank everyone again for joining. We had a good group of attendants. If you have any questions of either Keith or myself, please feel free to email those, and mine is lee.mac@scra.org. I'll make sure that Keith gets those if you don't email those directly. And please come back again for our next webinar. Thanks everybody for your time and attention to joining us this morning.